Is there any member who doesn't yet have it?
So I have. So have I received it.
Okay. All right, assuming all members now have it. Ms. Campbell, can I turn the floor over to you, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair, members, and the wider audience, colleagues. So we're moving now to the definition of self-generator. The private sector organization of Jamaica submitted a recommendation that the definition of self-generator be broadened as follows. Self-generator means a person who generates electricity for that person's own exclusive use or for his own subsidiary company, which he owns or has controlling interest in, and shall include a person who has entered into a net billing, auxiliary connection, or wheeling arrangement. The current definition of a self-generator under the Act means a person who generates electricity for that person's own exclusive use and shall include a person who has entered into a net billing or wheeling arrangement. We support the expansion of the definition with modification. The proposed definition is as follows. A self-generator means a person who generates electricity for that person's own exclusive use and shall include a person who has entered into a net billing, auxiliary connections, or wheeling arrangement. The wheeling arrangement allows for generation to a subsidiary company of the self-generator, and therefore we are of the view that there is no need for that express reference in the recommendation provided by the PSOJ.
Members, any comment? Okay. I think you can proceed, Ms. Campbell.
Sure. The JPS recommends the amendment of the definition of supply to include the sale or provision of electricity. Their concern is that the current definition, the way it is worded, there is a lacuna which seemingly allows persons to avoid the application of the Act where electricity is provided to a third party without the supplier charging for it. And they therefore seek the inclusion of the word provision or a suitable mechanism to plug the gap. The ministry has no objection to the proposal. The amendment proposed is as follows. Supply means, with respect to electricity, the activities involved in the sale or provision of electricity to consumers.
Members are okay with the ministry's position on that? So we can go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
Sure. Use of system charge. The JPS's proposal is that the definition is expanded to include any cost to be incurred by the single buyer to enable the wheeling of electricity This, they indicate, is intended to capture the recovery of incremental investment in the grid by the single buyer that is required to facilitate the needs of the person specifically engaged in wheeling, so as to ensure that this additional cost is not borne by other customers. Consideration was given to this recommendation, and it is the position that this recommendation is not supported. For these reasons, the OUR, as the regulator, in consultation with the JPS, agrees to the cost to be paid for services under such arrangements. And therefore, we believe that if there are additional costs, that would be the proper avenue for JPS to be able to recover those costs, as they have indicated there.
Most definitely agree with the proposal by the by the government here, the OUR here.
Okay, thank you. We can go on, Ms. Campbell. Members of the committee, I assume that your silence is agreement with the provision. So I'll give a few moments for you to interject, and if you don't, then we'll move on.
Yes, true. Silence is consent.
Okay.
Section.
Wait a minute. So,
Member Hilton.
yes, thanks, Ms. Goldenkamp. I was orienting myself, just thinking through and looking at, sort of reorienting myself, I should say. Looking at the provisions, not only individually, but as they relate to other provision to build a scheme. If you permit me to go back to this self-generation definition, which is where we started. The definition seems to me to focus on individual persons, whether that be corporate or real persons. The concern I have constantly expressed is that nowhere in the act, which we're seeking to amend, is there the consideration for the situation where you're talking about a special economic zone with multiple users within the zone, and there is a single developer. There is a developer of the special economic zone, and seeking to provide electricity for within the zone exclusively, and not to the grid. That situation is not contemplated in the self-generation definition. And I think that is something that an amended act must now contemplate.
I'd like to say something as well after that matter is addressed.
So I'm putting that forward very, very specifically, that because, and I was just going through and looking at the scheme that now moves from there to the single buyer. Well, it addresses then the question of supply, and that's where the scheme starts to raise concern for me because the supply, JPS is seeking as a broadened definition of supply to include provision of rather than simply sale to. And I believe all of this is meant to capture and to further restrict that situation that was mentioned above, where you're speaking to special economic zones in which there's a single developer seeking to provide power for its captive client and not for the grid. Right? So if you broaden it to supply, I think that is part of the amendment being sought by JPS. And when that is linked to the single buyer definition, then it's beginning to pose problem and to exclude the possibilities.
Member Hilton, for the benefit of the rest of the committee, if I don't know if you would be able to remind us that the ability of the developer in the special economic zone scenario that is covered under the SEZ Act.
Well, that it's not specifically addressed. It's not in the SEZ Act itself. It doesn't address in any way. And remember, Paul, who was privy to some of that discussion, may also help here that in the SEZ Act, it addresses the matter of self-generation in the Act. And this is why I'm saying we have to look at that definition and to address that, because currently the Act speaks to the ability of developers to self-generate in the SEZ. So there needs to be a coherence between the SEZ Act and what is being sought here. There has to be some coherence between the two.
Was that contemplated by the ministry, Ms. Campbell, in looking at this matter? The matter raised by Member Hilton?
It was not, and we would crave the committee's indulgence to look at it and return with our comments.
Yeah, please do.
Very well. Very well. Member Powell?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Acting Chair. I was just trying to, I've been quiet since the start of the meeting, trying to get my thoughts together, because I was quite stunned when the minister, who is the chairman, announced that he had to leave in a hurry, because I believe that as a committee, we really shouldn't start in this way. We have been in waiting since February to get back on track with the business of this committee, during which time a lot of things have happened, including some notion that this committee was delving into policy issues that ought not to concern
Member
us.
Powell, I might just cut you, because I don't know if you were here when Minister said it, but he did indicate that he would have some matters to discuss with the committee, but he would allow us to proceed through the matrix where we left off, and once he returned and we were finished, he would address those matters. So he did indicate he had some matters to discuss with us.
But quite frankly, I can't go on in a discussion which could be fruitless. We have been participating in these discussions from the start of the committee on the basis that we are assessing policy, which is what the legislation is all about. When that law was passed in 2015, it was based on a set of policies that I took to Parliament. So if we are reviewing the law, it must be reviewing policies. And I am now confused, because the matter that our member Hilton just raised, it has been raised before. We have had at least 3 times when that matter was raised, and I really thought that there was a trending view to enabling free zone operators or special economic zone operators to have their own electricity systems. So I really don't know what we are actually doing, whether or not the minister will come to say we are on the right track, we can continue to propose policies, to propose changes to policies, or what. So I really want to await the minister's return. So forgive me if I remain quiet until he gets back.
Thank you. Proceed, Ms. Campbell.
We now turn to the roles and responsibilities under the Electricity Act at Section 4. Now, there's a comment from Gerald Lindo. He notes Section 4, this duty of the minister to plan the system. And this is something that he supports by virtue of his comments. But his request of this committee is that the committee consider whether the minister should be given more resources for system planning, given the current capacity of the ministry and the experience of the development of the last integrated resource plan. We consider that this particular recommendation is outside the scope of the legislation.
Sorry, Acting Chair. Just to make clear something that I mentioned earlier, that the two aspects of what we discussed previously that my comment will be relevant to is the self-generator and the supply definition. Just want to make that very clear. These are two things we touched on at the top and moving on. And I just want to indicate that to the ministry as they look at it to address the coherence that, or the lack of a coherence that I think would exist if that is not addressed with respect to SEZ Act and how the definition of supply would and the restricting of the provision, the narrowing of the provision would affect that act.
We have taken note.
Go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
In relation to Section 5, Section 5 B2, there is a comment or a proposal rather that this section should make it mandatory rather than optional for the office, which is the OUR, to consider health and environment and should explicitly include emissions reduction. Now, under Section 5, the OUR, where it considers necessary, may give directions to any licensee with a view to ensuring that, specific to 5B2, the single buyer operates efficiently and in a manner designed to protect and preserve the environment. Now, we have no challenge with this recommendation, and we propose that Section 5B2 be expanded to not only allow for considerations to protect and preserve the environment, but also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
I don't think anybody on the committee would be in principle opposed to that.
Very well. Section
So we
6.
can move on.
Okay, sure. Section 6 standards of the single buyer. Now the PSOJ submitted that in relation to section 6.4, and that section provides that the published tariffs shall be cost reflective unless otherwise directed by the office. And each tariff category will apply uniformly across the island, and there will be no discrimination to customers on the tariff charged based on location. Now, the PSOJ has indicated that a new section 6.4 should be inserted to require that the published tariffs should be applied to other public utility providers based on an aggregated electricity usage and not per metered service. Having considered that recommendation, we are of the view that the aggregated billing can be provided through smart metering technology. But this tariff option is a decision for the OUR's consideration.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Section 6.4, the JPS is suggesting that the section should seek to codify many of the international best practices to which the single buyer must adhere when proposing tariffs, and that the OUR should equally respect when setting them. It is essential, they submit, that these principles should not be ambiguous or vague. The following are recommended. A, rates should be cost reflective. Rates should be non-discriminatory. The rates should comply with all applicable rules, regulations, or a licensee's license. The rates should not threaten the financial viability of the licensee. The rates shall be transparent in the sense that all choices of principles, policies, calculations, methodologies, and models used by the office shall be disclosed. We are aware that the license and the legislation, the Electricity Act, including the OUR Act, provides some guidance in relation to how the matter of the tariff is handled. And we are also of the view that the avenues for an appeal from a decision of the OUR, if the JPS is dissatisfied, provides the avenue for them to challenge whatever issues that they have in relation to a decision to that effect from the OUR. Ultimately, though, the OUR's assessment of this recommendation would provide a better guide, but based on our consideration, we believe that the provisions in the license, the Electricity Act, and the OUR Act and other guidelines that they utilize over the years would constitute the standards which would be published and known to the JPS.
Is it the minister's position that the position of JPS in this regard infringes on the OUR's role as a regulator?
It's not so much as an infringement. We believe that the concerns expressed by the by JPS are reasonable, but we do not have specific details on how the process is managed by the OUR, but we know, generally speaking, that that there are rules, principles within the law and the license that guides the OUR in making those determinations.
I don't know if I'm here. Am I not hearing Miss Campbell?
Are you hearing?
Oh, my internet. I'm hearing you now. My internet connection was unstable for a moment. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So I was explaining that the ministry is not discounting the validity of the recommendation of the concerns expressed by the JPS in this comment. What we are saying is that a reasonable regulator would be guided by the rules, the laws, and we know that the Electricity Act, the OUR Act, and the license, the JPS license, and would provide sufficient guide for the determination of the tariff here. And we say that also not knowing the specifics of how this process is managed by the OUR.
Thank you. Any other members come? Continue, Ms. Campbell.
Sure. Section 7. Now, Section 7 deals with the minister's responsibility for development, for planning the development of the system. And it provides that the minister should, in planning the system, the planning process should include considerations in respect of the integrated resource planning, the collection of data from electricity sector participants, consultations with the office, the single buyer, and other electricity sector participants, and the conduct of any relevant forecast. Now, BMR Energy has submitted recommendations that subclauses C and D should be expanded to provide for greater specificity regarding consultation. Now, let me repeat, subclause C says consultations with the office, the single buyer, and other electricity sector participants. And D provides for consideration to be given to the conduct of any relevant forecast. So BMR is saying that the requirement for consultation should be specific to include a listing of the stakeholders in the electricity who are described as electricity sector participants. And they've indicated that the list should include the independent power producers as well as major affected energy user stakeholder groups, such as the Jamaica Manufacturers, Factorers and Exporters Association, the Jamaica Hoteliers and Tourist Association, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, and the Consumer Affairs Commission. And we thought that it's probably not good practice to have a detailed list of electricity sector participants, but it might be helpful to include categories, a general category of stakeholders, to include industry experts, and in the public sector and the private sector being large electricity producers or consumers. And having such a category would include manufacturers, the service industry, the hotel and tourist association representative would have representation there.
Can I just ask you, we don't have any body here from legal reform, do we?
I'm not sure.
Is there anybody who's on the team from legal reform present in this meeting? No? Okay. I mean, I don't know that this is one of those concerns that really need to delay us. The fact of the matter is we don't typically put these kinds of specified stakeholders. We don't typically specify stakeholders in legislation when it comes to consultation processes like this, unless there's some very particular reason and agreement that would need to be reached with a particular stakeholder. So even the category, the process of consultation with the minister, does that not already include the minister reaching out and the minister also receiving requests to opine on a matter?
Yes, that is so. That is so. Sure.
And so the ministry is saying what then? That we should insert a category?
Well, the ministry is saying
as opposed
that,
to the specific.
right. So, well, we're of the view that electricity sector participants is sufficient. But if a category is allowed, then we would not be opposed to expanding it a little to say the major electricity producers, both private and public sector.
This is a provision dealing with the minister's responsibility for planning the development of the system. Why
Correct.
is there any sort of bar on who the minister would consult with? Electricity sector participants excludes whom?
Well, and that we don't know, because we're of the view that the provision is there allowing for consultation, and whoever they are, they have an opportunity per the legal requirement to be brought to those discussions, to be invited to those discussions. So without knowing otherwise, we find that the current requirement or language or provision should be sufficient.
Thank you.
Sure. They have also expressed that the stakeholders are to be included in all communication and discussion prior to decision making. And we believe that the consultative process expressed in the law provides the mechanism for this already. Should I move on, Chair?
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
They've also submitted a comment in relation to Section 7, subsection 2, and that subsection provides, in relation to system planning, that the planning process for transmission and distribution shall specifically consider the location of renewable and other generation sources, taking into account the potential for electrification of rural areas. The recommendation is not supported. It is the preferred view that the inputs and assumptions rather of the planning process are best left to the integrated resource planning process. And we understand that is the case. So we don't agree that that particular detail should be included in the legislation. It is already observed in the integrated resource planning process, and an integrated resource plan is issued by the ministry every 2 years.
Members, any comments on that? Thank you, Ms. Campbell. I don't think we can disagree that inputs and assumptions are things that may change from time to time and really oughtn't be placed in the legislation.
So on subsection 7, the WRB Energy submitted a similar comment in relation to consultation, who should be consulted, and like BMR Energy, they suggested that a listing of the stakeholders be included in the legislation, and our position is the same in relation to that. JPS submitted a comment in relation to section 7.1c and section 7.3. Now, 7.1c requires consultation with the office, the single buyer, and other electricity sector participants. And this is also related to the minister's system planning function. The JPS is of the view that the OUR and other electricity sector participants who are included in the consultation process should comply with an obligation under section 7, subsection 3, which requires the licensee to provide information on the request of the minister, and that information is requested for the purpose of the minister executing his system planning responsibilities. And in relation to that obligation on the licensee, a failure to comply with this request without reasonable cause shall be an offense. So the JPS, in our interpretation, is recommending that the obligation which rests on the licensee to provide information for the purpose of the minister executing system planning responsibilities, and also the requirement that the failure to comply result in an offense should also apply to the OUR and also electricity sector participants. In our estimation,
Go ahead.
in our estimation, that recommendation is not supported. The section 7.1c treats with a consultative process. Section 7.3 creates an obligation for the licensee to supply information that is requested, and therefore should not necessarily apply to all electricity sector participants. A licensee also has a contractual duty under the license to ensure the sustenance of the electricity needs generally. And I think the mere fact that the law did not require that the electricity sector participants outside of a licensee and the single buyer who are participants, we don't think it should be extended to apply in that regard.
Are we talking about section 7.3 as it is currently?
Yes.
So the matrix that we have here, there's clearly an error there, because
You're coming in and out. Senator.
I'm saying there's an error in the matrix. In terms of where the ministry comes down on the point, there's an error there. I was a little confused when you were saying what you're saying, because it's inconsistent with what is in the matrix. I understand you to be saying, Ms. Campbell, that the ministry does object to that. Does object to including the OUR and to creating to applying the offense also to the OUR. Is that the interpretation of what you just said?
Yes. Well, no, not in relation to the OUR. The view expressed that I expressed earlier is that the obligation, the JPS in our interpretation wants an obligation to be imposed on electricity sector participants generally and the OUR in complying with a request for information from the minister. I don't know that in the planning process that there is request for information from other sector participants other than licensees. And I say that with the appreciation that the licensees would have an obligation under their license to supply electricity, for example, to sustain for the purpose of electricity generation to support the grid in one instance.
Thank you. I don't think that that is what is captured in your response in the matrix. So I'm assuming that to be an error. If there are committee members who have. Ms. Campbell, go ahead.
So should I move on, Chair?
Well, I would like you to acknowledge that there's an error in the matrix. Is there an error or not an error?
I'm not reading it to be different from what I've expressed already.
You're saying you don't agree that the
You're chiming in and out.
yes or
and distribution purposes. Section 8.1 of the Electricity Act reads, subject to subsection 2, a person shall not A, engage in the generation, transmission, distribution, dispatch, and supply of electricity, or B, erect, maintain, or have any electric line or other works over, along, across, or under any street or public road for the purpose of the supply of electricity, unless authorized to do so by an electricity license issued by the minister. We support the recommendation of the OUR, and we consider that the provision should be extended to include transmission and distribution. And in fullness, the proposal would read, subject to subsection 2, a person shall not erect, maintain, or have any electric line or other works over, along, across, or under any street or public road for the purpose of the supply of electricity, transmission, and distribution. For section 8, subsection 2, we have a comment that in relation to that section, the committee should consider or should be mindful of the ways in which the current law holds back innovation. The committee is asked to consider whether it would be appropriate to change this dynamic by opening the category of self-generation to include cooperative ventures, or by the issuance of more licenses to supply electricity. In fairness to the utility, its role should be allowed to evolve towards a greater focus on systems control, interconnection services, transmission and distribution. The future should be embraced rather than resisted. Now, section 8, subsection 2 reads, subsection 1, which imposes a requirement that any person engaged in the generation, distribution, transmission, dispatch, and supply of electricity should not undertake any such activities unless they're authorized to do so under a license issued by the minister. Subsection 2 says, so subsection 1 shall not apply, rather, to a person who generates electricity as a self-generator for that person's exclusive use, unless that person enters into a billing arrangement, a wheeling arrangement, or connects to a transmission line or distribution line for some other purpose. In consideration of that concern recommendation, it is the view of the ministry that the electricity wheeling regulation facilitates self-generation while maintaining integrity of the grid. And if
Continue, please.
sure. Now, section 9. Section 9 deals with the basis for the grant of electricity licenses. The OUR is suggesting that additional clauses be included. Formulation, the minister may grant an electricity license on the following bases. 1, pursuant to procurement under a competitive bidding process initiated by the generation procurement entity. B, pursuant to an application in the prescribed form for the license in respect of net billing, wheeling arrangements or other arrangements, or C, where the cabinet has determined that any of the following circumstances exists, namely, 1, an emergency situation exists, such as to make a competitive bidding process impractical. 2, the grant of the electricity license is necessary in order to accommodate an offer from a foreign government to the Jamaican government that will benefit the electricity sector. 3, due to exceptional circumstances or the prevailing economic and financial conditions in Jamaica, it is in the public interest to grant the license. The OUR is suggesting the following as additional clauses. Pursuant to an application for a license in the prescribed form to transmit, distribute, dispatch, or supply electricity, or for the erection, maintenance, and having an electric line and works over, along, across, or under any street or public road. 2, pursuant to an application for the generation of electricity from cogeneration facilities. And 3, pursuant to the addition of new generation by way of a process approved by cabinet in exercise of its powers under section 20. Now, there is no challenge with the recommendation at number 3 in the OUR's submission in relation to item 1, to the extent that this is a reference to the single buyer, which currently has the license to execute those activities, transmission, distribution, dispatch, and supply. There is no objection to that. Now, in relation to item 2, it is considered that cogeneration, the generation of electricity from cogeneration facilities is captured under the applications to independent power producers, and therefore does not need a separate or special category. Moving on to section.
I had Ms. Campbell.
9(1)(c). So JPS has submitted in relation to 9(1)(c), 1 and 3. I will repeat those. And in relation to this provision, the minister may grant a license where cabinet has determined that any of the following circumstances exists. In relation to 9C1, the circumstances described here is where an emergency situation exists, such as to make a competitive bidding process impractical. And 3, due to exceptional circumstances or the prevailing economic and financial conditions in Jamaica, it is in the public interest to grant a license. The JPS identifies that emergency situations which make a competitive, right, so JPS is acknowledging that 91C 1 and 3 identifies emergency situations which make a competitive bidding process impractical, and it allows for the competitive bidding process to be circumvented, in a manner of speaking, where it is founded that due to exceptional circumstances and the prevailing financial condition, it is in the public interest to do so. They state, having regard to the importance of a competitive process, it is proposed that consideration should be given to include a requirement for cabinets to establish guidelines around what constitutes an emergency, exceptional circumstances, and the public interest for the grant of a license under this section. We've considered that the public procurement regulations of 2018 defines emergency or extreme urgency for the purposes of procurement, and we consider that we could borrow that definition to be adopted here. Oops. And in relation to that definition, the regulations provide that a situation is one of emergency or extreme urgency. That situation includes a situation that arises as a result of events not attributable or foreseeable by the procuring entity and necessitate the award of procurement contract to effect repairs or remedial action to safeguard the public interest or protect infrastructure or public monies. So what I just read last offers some guidance as to what the considerations could be in relation to a situation of emergency or extreme urgency. We've considered also that public interest is an expression that is known to the law. There might not be a definition per se in any law, but that the courts have the parameters in determining what public interest is, and that would differ depending on the nature of the issue under consideration. So in short, we do not discount the recommendation, but we consider that there is sufficient basis in the public procurement regulations, in the definition of emergency or exceptional circumstances, that could provide some guide here in any considerations under the Electricity Act requiring the specific provision to be invoked. And we do support the suggestion that it would enhance transparency in any consideration of that nature. In relation to section 9.3b, the OUR suggests that a detailed provision setting out a function of the regulator to review applications for electricity licenses, the matters to be considered, and the submission of recommendations to the responsible minister, akin to provisions in the Telecommunications Act, be included in the Electricity Act. Now, in the Telecommunications Act, the OUR is the agency to which the applications are submitted directly, and they review and submit their recommendations to the minister. The opposite obtains under the Electricity Act because the ministry receives and processes applications for electricity licenses. And while we support that there are cases in which we have requested OUR to opine on applications, we do not support the OUR's recommendations as proposed. Section
Okay,
10.
I think, is that the end of 9?
Yes. That's the
Okay,
end.
before we move on to 10, I believe Minister has come back into the meeting.
Thank you.
My
Thank
internet
you.
connection is a little unstable. Is everyone hearing me?
Councillor. Yeah. Are you
I'm
hearing me?
hearing you, Minister. A little choppy, but I'm hearing you, but it might be a function of my own internet. I don't know if any of the other members can indicate.
Hold on, let me try and do something here. 1 second.
I'm hearing you clear, Senator. I think Minister Internet is dropping in and out. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay. Not clear to you, okay. Are you hearing me? Well, you're obviously hearing me, Member Miller.
Loud and clear.
Stand by, I'm going to try and change the internet. Stand by. Are you hearing me now? Hearing me better now?
Yes, Minister, I'm hearing you.
Great. All right, sorry for my.
Yes, Minister. Drink
Alright.
some water first, though.
Yeah, some sinus issues, not the water not helping me at all. All right, I was listening. You want to just give me a quick recap, Senator Campbell, as to where we are and any issues? Senator Campbell
You're
here?
muted, Senator.
Oh, I'm so sorry, I was muted. I was saying, Minister, that we have gone through up to section 10, and I know Mrs. Campbell would have noted the queries earlier of Member Hilton in relation to a matter that he had raised before, which the ministry is to come back to us on. So that's in relation to the question of the developer in this special economic zone scenario, and provision of electricity to the entities that would be in that zone. I believe that was section, I think the member can remind me. Not recalling the exact section that it was, but I know the ministry would have noted that, Ms. Campbell would have noted that for further indication, future indication rather. And so we're at section 10, Minister.
All right. Thank you once again. I have some general comments that I wanted to make because I've been giving this a lot of thought based on the enormous task that we have been given as members of this Joint Select Committee. And it has been impacted even more by virtue of the pandemic and of course now the war. So in essence, when we were considering the Joint Select Committee process, the world was a significantly different place to where we are now. And that in itself creates a major issue for us in relation to the format that we're using. As a result of that, I asked the ministry team earlier in the year to review the electricity models and the trends specific to island jurisdictions as how it has been affected by the pandemic and of course now the war. When we were doing this, originally there was no COVID, no Ukraine war, and no global energy crisis, which we are in now. All that since changed, and we have seen a massive readjustment in how the globe is viewing energy. We have seen countries, for example, in recent times, announce with great fanfare getting rid of coal. Those same countries are now re-embracing coal as a strategic component of their energy independence. That in itself is significant based on how strident they were in relation to getting rid of coal. We have seen large economies like the UK move to renationalize parts of its electricity grid as a national strategic asset. Consequently, we, I believe strongly, and I'm hoping that my colleagues agree with me, have to reassess our priorities and review all our assumptions based on current trends, current global trends, as against what we used originally in relation to the matrix that we're using. What concerns me greatly is that time is not on our side. And what I would hate is for us to go down the wicket and at the end of the day, be faced with looking at giving JPS an extension to its license in 2027. Obviously, that's not where we want to go. What we really want is a holistic policy that can guide not only us, but generations in the future. So, colleagues, this Joint Select Committee is probably one of the most important Joint Select Committees in recent history because of the impact, not only currently, but 2 generations to come. And we have seen with exactly what we're doing now, where we went wrong in some areas, not that I'm casting blame, but what we could have done differently to have a different result coming into where we are now with this Joint Select Committee. So I'm going to use the recess to try and recalibrate, for want of a better word. I am definitively already started pulling together a high-level, multi-stakeholder team together to help us chart a current data-led way forward that will include, obviously, stakeholders, energy stakeholders, and of course, my opposition counterparts, some of which are on this very committee. But I believe that we have a responsibility that we need to, for want of a better word, wheel and come again. Because based on what we have, where we have reached so far, and some of the issues that have been raised by members of the committee and stakeholders outside of this committee, it is definitive that there are some fundamental issues that have to be looked at based on current trends as against what we used originally to come up with this matrix. So I don't want anybody to believe that we are going to delay for any extended period of time. But what I will say in my usual open and honest way is the fact that the ministry is short on resources, both personnel and other resources, in order to be able to give us the guidance that we require to make sure that we do this right. And we have reached out to multilateral stakeholders who have been very receptive, and I believe with their input and their assistance, it can take us a far way in a very short period of time. But I feel compelled to flag this, despite the fact that we've been going on the road and making progress. But I believe that if we were to continue and conclude this matrix and make amendments, it still would not give us the best scenario for the decades to come, not years, but decades to come, based on what has transpired in the world over the last 24 months. So I feel at this point, the time in the recess can be used to pull together this multi-stakeholder group and to get the necessary resources that we require to make sure that we have a relook. And of course, obviously, some policy directives will be required from cabinet, which obviously I would do and take to them in the shortest possible time. But I believe that this would be the best and most responsible action to take based on where we are in the world today. So I open up for comments on that. But as the chair of this committee, I believe that it is prudent to take this path to make sure that we are guided and make the best decisions based on the times that we are facing now and what we are proposed to face in the coming years, months and years ahead.
Chairman,
Go ahead. I can't see the hands up, so just go in order, please.
I'm trying to, my hand is up.
Go ahead, Member Paul.
Yes. All right, so it's a good thing that I waited on your return on your comments, because as I had indicated earlier, we really not too sure on where we're going. And so the effort even today, based on what you have just said, is really in vain. Minister, I am extremely disappointed. Our work started during COVID, and that's the reason why we have gotten so accustomed to doing these meetings this way. We're in the throes of COVID. And if there was ever a time, Minister, for us to move with tremendous alacrity to complete our work, this work really was due to commence 5 years after the Electricity Act was passed in 2015. So it was in 2020 that this review should have occurred. We're 2 years out. So if there's ever a time for this work to be completed with alacrity, is now. It's now because we are faced with another crisis in energy. And it is not only on the transport side, but importantly on the electricity side. And Minister, we have been going very well. I mean, I thought you approach a thing in a business-like manner. You started our meetings on time, and we were proceeding until something happened in February. And probably you can't say it on this platform, but you know you can trust me to say to me what happened in February, because something strange has happened, which has caused this committee to pause, not to pause, to halt its work since February. And when we last met, a very curious thing happened, because you as minister who understand how legislation are developed and how this work of a joint select committee is undertaken, you quite curiously raise the issue as to policy, and that there might be this view that we are trespassing on policy. This is all about policy, Chairman, as you know. It is every line that we go through relates to a policy, and for which we would have to do drafting instructions eventually. That would have to be cleared by the cabinet. So in the process, we did say to you, Minister, that it's important that rather than us just rambling along and going at the pace we're going, that it would be important for your ministry to come to us and speak definitively on the various points that were being raised in relation to policy. And after some time, we got that. So I am not sure what you're trying to say. You just mentioned a while ago that you need additional resources. But you know, you just at the start of this meeting introduced 3 very capable persons who seem to have the kind of qualifications that would be needed. In fact, before this, you only had 1 key person who had left, Mr. Vidal, but you seem to have replaced him with 3, plus the other staff members who have done, including Ms. Campbell, a very good job to date. So, Minister, I am at a loss. I don't know that we can countenance this, what I'm perceiving to be a grand waste of time if you are going to now pause the work of this committee again to go through a recess, and then for us to meet back when we are faced with such calamitous pricing for electricity, when we are faced with a crisis that you know can have the effect.
Orwell,
Yes.
let me answer you. First of all, I'm too old to be accused of youthful exuberance.
Yes.
So let me start.
And nor arrogance.
Let me say to you that we are about to enter the summer recess. And what I'm saying to you is that I'm going to use that time to make sure that the new persons who you spoke about, who are just on in the ministry, can get an opportunity themselves to catch up on the act, as they are very new, some weeks old, some months old in the job. And when I said that there is a deficit, I am not speaking to the ability of those who are there. I'm speaking to the magnitude of the work. And what I want to do is use the period to make sure that when we come back outside of recess, we would have been able to look at the change in trends. So when you say we started to meet in COVID, absolutely we did. But the data that we are using is not COVID data or post-COVID data. So all I'm saying, out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to make sure I'm not doing away with what has been done. There may be tweaks to the matrix, but what I do know is when we come back, we will make sure that we are comparing apples with apples. So please don't put words in my mouth as a chairman.
Yes,
and speak about a grand waste of time. We have wasted no time because it's coming out of the deliberations why I have made this decision, because I am seeing and hearing through my own consultations where there may be some areas that are in urgent need of revisiting based on the change of trends that have taken place in the global marketplace.
and all I will say in response, Minister,
yes,
that this has been an absolutely grand waste of time. And it is, you will hear more from me on this, because I have never seen such mismanagement of the affairs of our country. And it's a grand waste of time.
Member, you are always entitled to your opinion, and I look forward to hearing from you. But what I can say is that at the end of this, I will not be accused of youthful exuberance. I will go down as
only arrogance. Only arrogance. It will only be arrogance.
Generations to come will look at this committee and say that we did good work and don't have criticisms as we now have based on the current act. Anybody else? Mr. Miller?
No, sir, Chair. I didn't have my hand up. I say Member Hilton hand up, but sufficing to say that, you know, in embracing what you have to say, Sir Chair, I don't see it as a waste of time. I've sat in the meeting, you know, I've listened attentively. I'm not afraid with the terminologies and the meetings. I'm getting up to speed where that is concerned. But in my point of view, I would not say it's a waste of time. I see merit in what you're saying to ensure that it's done properly. You know, the act that we currently have in front of us has been haunting us for years, and something drastic has to be done with the act. So I've seen merit in what you're saying, Sir Chair, and I embrace what you're saying. I've not seen any arrogance, and I've not seen any mismanagement of the portfolio on the government level. You know, I'm in total agreement, because anything that Member Miller decide to put my signature to, I want to ensure that, you know, it benefits the public at large. Thanks, Sir Chair.
Chairman.
Go ahead, Member Hilton. Sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my camera on and start. Okay. Is it started? My camera.
No.
I don't see you, but I'm hearing you.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get it on now. Okay. First of all, I do feel it's regrettable. I must tell you, I'm not clear why we have had this suspension from February.
Sorry, Mr. Hilton.
Yeah.
Just for a point of order and clarification. We are now at the last meeting before recess to come
Okay.
back in September.
Mhm.
So I'm not understanding what the point is in relation to the point being made about a suspension. I'm giving you my comments
Minister,
on the note of this. Yes.
Minister, you're reacting to something I did not say. I was just
No, I'm responding to what was said before and what you are saying as well, because what you're trying to say is that there's a suspension as a result of what I said a while ago.
No, I did not. I've said no such thing.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, I was really making the observation that from February this is one of the few meetings. Well, we're just now picking up. In fact, when we started, I had to sort of reorient because it had been such a while. So I was just saying that whatever the reason has been, and part of it, I think you explained partially about bringing on new personnel and all of that. But what I am saying, as a person with portfolio opposition, portfolio responsibility on industry and investment, I can tell you that this process is absolutely critical, and we have to ensure. I think you have clarified some of the concerns that I had about the time frame. I did hear you mention the licenses, the JPS license that expires in 2026 or 27, you said. And that too is an important context in which we are operating. And we have to make sure, because of the timing situation, that these two exercises are one, none of them are unduly delayed, because, as you said, we can't abide an extension of the license. It's not in the public's interest. And I'm not saying you're suggesting there will be. I'm just agreeing with you that it will not be in the public's interest for such a thing to occur. And therefore, whatever we do, we have to make sure that we prepare ourselves, we do the work that is necessary. But the adjustment to the license is a related but separate exercise that we must bring to a conclusion. As it relates to investments, right now, I'm aware that current investments on the table have been held up, waiting for some kind of clarity out of this exercise, because people want to know what's the energy situation and what are the options and possibilities for investors. So any delay is not to be encouraged, and we need to move post-East. And as you said, the summer break is on us, and I hope that we return fairly quickly and with a head of steam before us, so that we can move expeditiously and sensitively and sensibly to come to a conclusion that is beneficial to the country as a whole.
Thank you, Member Hilton, and you can be assured that, as I said before, the consultations will include the opposition. The appointees of that will be obviously made by your side. But what I will not what I'll not accept is to be rushed, and because we have certain timelines to make bad decisions, which will affect the country going forward, which we have a history on both sides, enough to go around the table. So I am fully aware, and what I want to do is to make sure that when we do come with the final revisions, that they are current in relation to the times that we are living in and the times that we expect to take us forward. And that's all I'm trying to achieve. I'm just being exceptionally cautious, and to allow the team which is pretty new, to get a few, to be able to catch up and to be able to make sure that we get the necessary advice, internal and external, to make sure we make the best decisions in the interest of all of Jamaica. That's all I'm trying to do. So the grandstanding won't affect my thought process. And I look forward to the cooperation, as you have rightly pointed out, that you are prepared to give, and we will be in touch in very short order. So whereas the committee goes on recess, I won't be on recess. Yes, and neither will the ministry team and the other multilateral agencies that will be assisting us, along with the stakeholders.
Minister, can I just say one thing?
Sure.
We have both sides have had recourse to and reason to use the multilateral organization. My only advice to you and my experience is think carefully and cautiously and get the best advice, because the fact that they're multilateral don't mean that they've been helpful to us all the time. Think very carefully and hard and make wise choices, because they've contributed to some of the problems we've had over the years. Of that, I'm certain.
I take your advice on board, sir, as I do always from any source and any channel. And as I said, you will be hearing from me in short order, and I will keep the committee members updated even during the recess in relation to the progress. And the work has started already and will continue through the recess into the new parliamentary term. Can I have someone?
Chair,
Go ahead.
if I might, I just wanted to thank you for the indication of contemplation and reset. And I want to thank Member Hilton as well for his very sober comments, indicative of the sobriety of thought that ought to attend a situation where we see so much volatility in the energy sector. I think it's unfortunate that, I don't know if it's sometimes, when you're in a statue in the garden of politics for a long time, it's very hard not to make politics out of something that is really a national issue that we ought to be looking at collectively and putting our best minds to. But the fact is, as you have indicated, Chair, there has been a lot of volatility in the energy sector over the last few months. We are reviewing an act that is not in keeping with the considerations we ought to be contemplating at this point in time. And the worst thing that we can do is to engage the legislative process in form and not in substance. So I thank you, Minister, and I support the process that you are now indicating to us will have to be reset and re-engaged. I look forward to the collaboration that we will have and hearing from the ministry as they beef up their capacity. And I think that it's unfortunate that any member would politicize this issue with words like mismanagement and waste of time. The people's business cannot be a waste of time, and it cannot be a waste of time to do it properly. May it please you.
Thank you. Member Gamble. So, members, I thought it important that I put my thoughts on the table. It has been a reflective time for me, especially in light of what has been transpiring in the global energy world. And I believe that what I'm doing is a prudent and right thing to do. And I will take any amount of flack for it, because at the end of the day, if we do it right, then I'll be proven right. And as I said before, at this point in time, there are some aspects of this that need to be reviewed, not the whole act, but definitely some fundamental parts of it, especially in light of the change in dynamics in the industry. And it will be irresponsible of us to continue down using data that is not current and not accurate based on the times and what has changed. So that's my closing comments, or should I say my opening and closing. And as I said before, this is a priority for me as minister and the ministry, and especially as chairman of this joint select committee. And we will use the time over the next few weeks going into September, so that by September we'll be able to give a proper update and obviously continue with a timeline for completion. We didn't take the minutes at the beginning because the minutes were circulated just earlier today. So can I ask if the members have actually gotten a chance, or you want us to defer it to the
Pardon
next
me?
meeting to give you an opportunity? Yeah,
Pardon me, sir. No, the minutes were not yet circulated, sir.
okay. So we'll defer to the next sitting, which will be confirmed in due course. Thank you very much. Enjoy your summer break, and as usual, keep safe and keep healthy. Thank you very much.
Same to you,
Thanks,
Minister.
Chair. Thanks, Ian.
No.